Well, we're staying pretty steady. You want to give it a go, Pat?
Sure. Okay, everyone. My name's Pat Kramer, and I'm the program chair for the Crescenta Valley group of the Sierra Club, Angeles chapter. And myself and David Eisenberg, who's co-hosting today, want to welcome you to what will be a very interesting conversation with Helen Holden-Slotchie from the Regenerative Law Institute. And she's going to be talking about Stop the Frack, Unleashing the Power of Clarity, Courage, and Community, How Ingenuity Led to Protection of the Environment Against Big Money Fracking. But before we get into our presentation, I'd like to just tell you a little about the Crescenta Valley group, which is the group that I'm in. I've been in for 30 years. CV group has been around for a long time, well more than the 30 years I've been a member of the Sierra Club. And since COVID, we've just slowly started to coordinate hikes again, which is something that our group was known for, doing hikes in the Angeles forest mostly, during the day, during the night, weekend trips. Fred Dong, our chairperson of the CV group, was coordinating national and also international trips to different places that were really amazing. And his big trip is coming up in August, and that's British Columbia and Canada. And I may have said that wrong. It might just be Canada. The Canadian Rockies, excuse me. It was the Canadian Rockies is the next trip that Fred is coordinating. But we are known for doing a lot of things in our community too. We have monthly tree waterings of the trees that were planted at Duke-Majan Wilderness Park in La Crescenta. We're trying to keep them alive during the drought. So that happens every month. And we also coordinate tree care events in Sunland, Tujunga, where I am a resident. And we prune, we fertilize, we water, and we put mulch around the trees there, which are suffering because of the heat and also because the city of LA does not water them anymore. So if you would like to be a part of either of those activities, you're welcome to email myself, Pat Kramer, at patkramerstnc@gmail.com. And I'm sure David will put that in the chat.
I'll let you put your email in the chat.
Okay, I will do that.
I did put the sign up to the tree watering brunch.
Thank you very much. And we're also going to be doing a picnic in July at Duke-Majan Park. Okay, and so that's going to be July 23rd at 8 a.m. It's a once-a-year event. We just meet people in the community that are interested in hiking and want to be a part of the Sierra Club. And, we just provide some refreshments, and whoever wants to can take a hike with us before it gets too hot. So, David, would you like to talk about the Verdugo Hills group?
Yes. Good evening, everybody. My name is David Eisenberg. I'm the chair of the Verdugo Hills group. We're primarily Glendale and Burbank, with some of Los Angeles area that surrounds that, and a little bit of, I think, Crescenta Valley also in our group area. So we're just south of the Crescenta Valley group. We are fairly active in conservation activities. We're fighting the expansion of the Grayson Power Plant. We're fighting against artificial turf installations, a very toxic material that it's got great publicity, and we have a program coming up that might be of interest to anybody living anywhere in California. In July 11th, we have Alondra Lopez, who is a deputy to Assembly Member Laura Friedman in the California legislature, is going to talk to us about the legislation that's coming up in the California Assembly and Senate. So these would be bills of interest, environmentally interesting to us that we might want to support and, make the appropriate phone calls to the legislature. And I'll put the link to that in the chat. Let me click on that. And we hope to see some of you. Maybe we'll get back to in-person meetings when we do. Crescenta Valley and Verdugo Hills Group, we share the same meeting spot. It's right on the border between our groups. So it's maybe we'll be able to do in-person meetings.
And that's at the Crescenta, La Crescenta Library on
Yes.
Foothill Boulevard in La Crescenta.
Yeah. And I think they're open, but we're still waiting for clarification of the CR Club's going to even let us schedule anything there. So that would be, where things are slowly reopening, hopefully we'll reopen. So back to you, Pat, and I will go wait till the end till we answer questions.
Okay, thank you, David, for all that you do behind the scenes. So I am going to be telling you a little about our guest tonight, our guest speaker, Helen Holden Slotchie. I met Helen a couple of months ago. We started working together on some projects, and I became very interested in the fact that she had won the 2014 Goldman Environmental Award for North America, which is known as the Green Nobel Prize for Environmental Advocacy. And I started asking her, well, how did you get that award? And she began telling me about how she and her husband formulated the legal strategies that led the grassroots effort, which led to an unprecedented statewide ban on fracking in all of New York State. So we're going to be hearing about how Helen did this. And she's going to tell us a little bit more about herself. I do want to tell you that she has also won other awards, including the Pete Seeger Activist Award by the New York City Community Garden Coalition for her tireless commitment to taking back local control of significant decisions that affect the social and physical landscapes. And she was also presented with the Outstanding Citizen Citation by the New York State Assembly in June of 2014. And one thing close to my heart was in January of 2021, the college she graduated from, which was Holy Cross, the College of Holy Cross, presented Helen with their Holy Cross Difference Maker, which is an honor bestowed on only 39 alumni from the college's entire history. And just in case you don't know, Holy Cross College, or the College of the Holy Cross as it's known, is in Worcester, Massachusetts, which is my hometown. So Helen and I had a lot to talk about. So with that, I want to start by asking Helen, how did you get involved in the fracking fight? How did it all begin?
So I think sort of just not quite as the way it is in California, where you might see so many oil and gas rigs. In upstate New York, there were very small gas installations, but there were a lot of, in 2008 or so, lots of these Schlumberger trucks and all increased industrial activity, truck traffic. And then these signs started popping up, frack with a big X through them. And then I saw articles in the local newspaper, and they're fracking. Well, what's fracking? So they were having sort of across upstate New York a number of sort of local town hall forums, and a group called Shale Shock was one of the early groups out there, and they had a speaker come to this town hall forum, and there was a municipal attorney, someone from the Landowners Coalition, and someone from Shale Shock, and they gave this presentation and showed especially the woman from Shale Shock, exactly what happens to communities when fracking occurs. And I was just horrified. I couldn't believe, because I had heard a lot of the rhetoric about, this amazing technological advance and how, just amazing the entire process of fracking is, which is really just breaking up rocks underground, shattering rocks to get molecules of gas, again, out of solid rock. This hardly seemed to me, smashing stones, to be the best that the 21st century could offer. And so that's when I really felt compelled to get involved, because there was just this sense of resignation, because everyone thought that the local communities had no ability to say no to this. And fracking was coming. It was going to be very, very destructive to the fabric of the local communities, but there was nothing that could be done. And as a former corporate lawyer working for sort of big money interests in my past, you don't tell those kinds of clients, no, you don't give up before you even start. You figure out how to get things done. So I thought that I would bring that attitude towards this, and I basically started going to every group meeting I could go to, every forum I could go to just really try to soak in everything I could learn to figure out how I might best apply myself in the situation.
Now, what were you doing for work at that time?
So my history had been working at a larger firm, and then I moved to upstate New York in 1999 and had been general counsel to my husband's family and his company with a chain of retail stores. And so we were winding down that operation, and actually my husband, we decided he said, I have some free time, I'm going to play golf. And I said, I have some free time, I'm going to start going to gas drilling meetings. And
And you were living, whereabouts were you living?
So this was in Ithaca, New York, and Ithaca is basically in an area called the Finger Lakes, because it looks like there's a whole series of lakes that almost looks like the hand. So these very deep glacial lakes, and it's a pristine area with just wineries and educational. Cornell is in Ithaca College, number of colleges in the area, but it's not a very industrialized area. So sort of in the middle of nowhere and at a place with just tremendous freshwater resources.
And so you started seeing that if the fracking did occur as it was planning to, the oil and gas companies were planning to do that, that was going to change the whole environment around this beautiful area with the Finger Lakes.
So just devastating. There had been, one of the things that came up at the very first meeting I went to was there had been a gas well explosion in a place called Dimmock, Pennsylvania. And this became a very famous, one of three sort of massive fracking problems. There was one in Pavilion, Wyoming, one in Weatherford, Texas, and then in Dimmock, Pennsylvania, that were sort of the poster children of fracking gone wrong. And not only had almost an entire street lost its fresh water, and you can't imagine what it does to the value of your home and your quality of life to not have fresh water come out of your tap. And in fact, to have what's coming out of your tap be incredibly dangerous. And worse yet, within the town where this had happened, this whole dynamic of blaming the victims of this well explosion for sort of ruining the party for everyone by complaining about the fact that they didn't have water. And all of that combined, I just couldn't imagine that happening in Ithaca and our area. You come to that area because it's so beautiful. If you destroyed it, it would just eliminate the whole foundation upon which the vibrancy of that area was based.
Yes, I understand that. And of course, no one wants fracking to occur in their backyard. What kind of arguments?
Not even Rex Tillerson.
What kind of arguments were they making for bringing fracking in? Were they paying people? Were they buying up properties?
Well, they wouldn't, the oil and gas company does not want to actually own your land because they don't want to be responsible for cleaning up the mess afterwards. So they will lease the land from you. So oil and gas companies were going out and they would pay signing bonuses to local landowners to get them so that basically the stock prices of oil and gas companies are based on land under like reserves. So they would go out and want to increase their reserves by leasing land. And the general promise was this was going to be great jobs, tons of money for everyone, streets paved with gold. And I went back and found in the 1860s when they were working on some of these projects, a literal article with the headline, like the streets will be paved with gold from like that. And it was that kind of mentality that this was just an absolute, you couldn't lose with fracking.
So you went and you got yourself educated, and then where did it begin? Do you remember what your first effort was?
So the there were two sort of dual track in the very beginning. One was there's an environmental review process in New York State that is like the national environmental review process is called NEPA. And there was a SEQURA, SQURA project, sort of environmental review in New York. And they had actually, the early activists in the story here had petitioned enough to get the state government to conduct an environmental review before they permitted fracking. They did say, we're not just going to allow this the way, say, Pennsylvania did, with no consideration whatsoever. New York had committed to having world-class regulations. So there was a regulatory process underway, and we got involved in educating people how to make, I didn't know how to do, how do you comment on proposed environmental regulations effectively? And effectively as a activist is not effective from the government's terms. Like they wanted you to fill out a form online, check boxes so they could just sort of consolidate, group all of those comments. We said, handwrite your comments, put it on a postcard, send 10 postcards in on 10 different pieces of paper. They actually had to scan. We got more comments delivered on, and there were a series of solicitations of comments, but they literally spent almost 3 years at one point just scanning comments from people that were coming in, a tremendous amount of comments. So we got involved in that process. And we also got involved with a local, in the middle of this very historic village, it was actually called Horseheads. But in the village of Horseheads, they did put this massive sort of fracking support operation in the center of a village. And the neighbors there were concerned. We got involved and we lost because the zoning code explicitly allowed this. There was no getting around it. But that was the glimmer of the idea that we lost here because of what the zoning code said, but we could win if the zoning code said something different. And we got there before the project. So, before something that was otherwise permitted got permitted, then you have vested rights. We saw this opportunity of the power of local laws from one of these sort of very early projects.
So now you formed a nonprofit, correct, to work under?
Yes. So my husband and I, as we were sort of going out to meetings and talking to people, it became clear that nobody else was leading the charge here. In fact, the Sierra Club and many other big green groups were getting money from the natural gas industry to fund their coal campaigns, but they agreed, the big green groups had all decided that the reasonable and practical approach, the way to preserve their seat at the regulatory table, was to regulate fracking and not call for a ban. that to call for
Ooh.
a ban was unreasonable. That was too radical. That was not sort of playing by the rules. The rules were the regulatory rules, and that's what they know how to do regulations. They can get grants to do regulations. They can get funding to do regulations. And that's where the entire sort of focus was on how do we regulate this. So we decided we couldn't rely on any other big green group with resources to help us. So we formed a group. We called ourselves Community Environmental Defense Council, which sounds like a whole bunch of other things, but wasn't. And it was people, oh, I've heard of you guys. It's like you couldn't possibly. It's my husband and I. We made it up 2 weeks ago. But it sounds like something much bigger than 2 people. So we didn't have a website. We didn't identify, like we were from Community Environmental Defense Council. And that sounded very legitimate and big. And like we knew what we were doing. And so that was the genesis of when we set it up as a nonprofit public interest law firm. And we went out, you know, we were a 501c3. We were able to sort of create our own widget, as it were, since there was nobody else that was going to take the direct tack that we wanted to take of really challenging the industry for a ban.
So I'm thinking that this must have caused a lot of stress in your life, maybe kept you up at night. How did you handle the pushback and resistance?
So there was withering attack from the gas industry, although mostly in the beginning, they just made fun of us. And like my husband, who is older than I am, who was a partner at a terrific law firm, he waved in, he hadn't practiced, he wasn't actively practicing law. So to be part of the law firm, he had to actually sit for the bar. And they would say he was a first-year lawyer. It's some first-year lawyer. And it's like, well, no, not really. Like he's been practicing for 20-something years. He's not a first-year lawyer. And but we took the general idea was when we were getting attacked, we were headed in the right direction. That if they weren't attacking us, if they weren't pushing back, then we had fallen, like we knew we weren't doing the right thing. So if, you know, and we weren't, but if we had veered off and were pushing for regulations and they were like, oh yes, now you're being very reasonable. And like, we approve of this, you know, please come to our, you know, we're going to have a party in Aspen and you can come and we'll all drink wine and we'll talk about regulations. We would know we were on the wrong track. When they would say, you know, this is ridiculous, this is unprofessional, this might even be criminal. We were like, now we're on the right path. And so we would use that as sort of an indicator of whether we were headed in the right direction or not. And we would actually manage to really use the attacks as motivation and will to keep going. And to say, you know, to just not give in to these bullies who are just accustomed to either buying their way to get what they want. And if they didn't get you with the money, then just outspending you and burying you. And we did not want to stand for that.
So tell me a little about how you use resistance to motivate yourself, because that's a new concept for a lot of people.
So the idea is that basically so if you think of, if you're sailing, you don't need to be blowing the wind and holding the tiller. You can let the wind blow, and then you can, even heading almost directly into the wind, you can skate that wind, and you only need to have the power of the tiller. You don't have to be doing all the work. So, and that's how, or if you think of when they send, spaceships off into deep space and they loop around a planet to kind of get that velocity. And it, for us, is that same idea that when you're getting that resistance, it's almost like you can just sort of spin it like I have this vision of a spiral. So like you take that and you use it to power yourself forward instead of letting it detract energy from you or deter you from your course. You actually sort of approach it and harness that energy for your own, sort of like a polarity switch, or like inverting the energy.
So when you started going public with your efforts, how did you approach the zoning issues? Did you go to a lot of meetings in different areas of New York? Did you take them on one by one?
So yeah, so that piece of the puzzle, I actually did a fair amount of study on what's called, one name for it is rural development or rural sociology. And I learned that when the USDA wanted farmers to adopt a new farming technique, they didn't go out and conduct a whole bunch of education of like 100 farmers. They would go and pick the biggest farmer in town and then get that person to change their techniques. And then all the other farmers would, they'd actually put signs in the farmer's yard, like now, Farmer Jones is now doing X. And the other farmers, oh, look what Farmer X, he's doing over here. I'd like to do that. So we concluded that if we could get 2 or 3 towns to be the first ones to use this local law strategy that we had. So there was a rule that said only the state could regulate the industry. The industry bought and paid for that rule. They were very proud to tell everyone that, like, well, we wrote the law. We meant that no regulation meant no regulation. We had the idea that we could use local zoning laws to prohibit high impact industrial uses, that was not a regulation of the industry, that was a regulation of land use. And that, no, in fact, that was not the ultimate regulation. It was just, it was a different sort of regulation that was not prohibited. And that's what industry was just like, it's ridiculous, just ridiculous idea. And we're like, well, I don't agree. And so we went up, but trying to take this idea and turn it into an actual thing, we went and we basically posted an article in the Sierra Atlantic magazine called a plan for drilling, a way to control drilling. And we offered to give educational presentations to anybody who would have us. And we went everywhere sort of promoting this idea and trying to get somebody to go first, some town to jump in. And we wound up getting 2 or 3 towns to actually do this. And that shifted everything, because the people, once we got the towns to somebody to make this change, just like that first farmer planting a new, planting his crops in a new way, this just planted the idea in people's heads that there really was an option. We did not have to just listen to the words of the gas company, that there was nothing that could be done, that there were towns out there passing these local prohibitions. So once we got the first 3, it's again kind of like with the way it flipped with using resistance as power. We didn't have to go out and try to get towns to want to do this. The towns and the people in the towns wanted to take this kind of action, and they came to us. And we worked all across upstate New York, and towns would hold town board meetings on Saturdays and Sundays because we were booked every day during the week with educational presentations. And we would spend the days drafting local laws and, environmental reviews and the things people needed to pass these laws, and then would spend the evenings, often until 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night, and then the constituents would want to debrief afterwards. So it, could be getting home 2 or 3 in the morning to then wake up the next morning, draft all day, and then go out again at night. And we were doing this. We believed that we really needed to have as many towns as possible pass these bans. There were court cases pending. Of the first 3 towns, 2 got sued almost right away. And so as those court cases were heading through the courts, we wanted this to become a political issue. And that if it's a legal issue, if we got 1 or 2 towns to pass it, and the court considered those 1 or 2 towns. But if 50 towns, if 70 towns, if we just wanted to make it normal for towns to have passed these bans, and that was really going to shift the psychology of the judges when they were considering the legality of these. The fact that all of these towns had done it was just going to be sort of its own irreversible momentum, which it turned out to be.
So I'd like to go back to the article that you published in the Sierra Atlantic magazine. Do you recall the date?
So I think it might have been like January or February of 2009, maybe.
And so that was the impetus, the beginning of you promoting what you were doing, promoting the fight, the beginning of the fight. Well, I'm glad that the Sierra Club played a positive role in at least helping with.
Yeah, the local groups were terrific. And there was actually, we went after, there was a one woman that I was working with who was just, she smelled something bad. And the various leaders at the top denied it, gaslighting us. You're crazy. Why would you think that? That's not even possible. Many years later, it turned out, in fact, they were getting this money, and there were apologies made.
So there was collusion because there was money coming from the gas and oil industry.
Right, to fight
That's
coal.
sad to hear.
The decision, well, it's very strategic because they sort of pit one, it's the whole, my grandmother used to say, you don't want the right hand to know what the left hand's doing. And so there's this idea of basically manipulating and using environmental groups sort of to do the bidding of one bad player versus another bad player, versus ultimately trying to do the right thing, basically being pawns in a game, but between fossil fuel interests, rather than like this idea of it's a bridge fuel or it's cleaner burning. And that was my, it's like natural gas is cleaner burning than coal. Well, why didn't you just say cleaner? You said cleaner burning. So what are you leaving out? And what they were leaving out was flaring, transporting, pipelines, enough that completely inverted the cleaner part. So, but they would say, well, it's cleaner. By the time it actually gets to your house, if you light the gas on fire, it burns cleaner than coal, which is filthy at the point of, combustion. That little piece, it's just the whole logic behind it is just,
it sounds like an interesting strategy, like you said, to get the environmental groups to back them. So tell me more about when you started realizing, when was it you started realizing that you actually were succeeding in your efforts? How many years had you been involved in this before you felt that way?
Well, I was convinced from the very beginning that we were going to be successful and that we had the right idea, and that I had this knowing about it. And lawyers never guarantee success, and people litigate, we were very confident, like this was not a change in law, what these towns were doing, despite what the gas companies were telling people. These were constitutional foundational rights. In New York, it's called home rule, of communities to control land use. And so we were pretty confident about our strategy. What we were not confident at all about how the regulatory process was going to turn out, or that there would ultimately be a statewide ban versus these local bans. And it was much later in the process that it became clear that the momentum of the idea of the local bans was industry wants to roll out across an entire community and multiple, across town borders. And my idea was, if we had a check, we didn't need everybody, we just needed a checkerboard and to introduce uncertainty into the equation. And that would not, gas companies like certainty, they like to value their reserves, they like to drill. They don't want to deal with a town board election and the potential for a ban in a town that didn't have one, every 2 years. So we thought that strategy would work, but that's not a statewide ban. And we ultimately got the statewide ban after a regulatory ban. The statewide ban wasn't until 2020. So, 11 years later for the
Wow.
statewide ban. So it took, that was much more of a surprise, but the local bans working, that I was like, I don't know how or why I was so confident. Like, I don't know that I would be looking back, but we were quite confident. And then one of the ideas that we had was to have a frack tracker, and a woman that I met in the fight named Karen Edelson, who knew GIS mapping, created a map for us of of upstate New York with all of the communities. And then there was a color code for like red, yellow, and green for where people were, if they had a ban, they had a movement, if they had a moratorium. And once Karen would tell us that people were calling her up, we want our color to change on our town. We had our first meeting last night, like change our color. We knew we were on to something, that like, not only were we getting these calls, not only were people really just energy, and there was just this energy that was unlocked when people had a path forward, when they could see this vision of success, and that we were not just doomed in this regulatory process. And I think once we felt that energy, and once people were calling up being change our color on your map, that we had really shifted the tide on how this was going to turn out.
In terms of time, how many years or months did it take?
So we started, it took 2 years to get like the first town laws. Actually, it takes almost 9 months to a year to actually pass a town law. You can do it potentially in a more expedited fashion, but there's a lot of hearings, and it just takes a lot of time to actually, from beginning to end, pass a town law. And so that process was about 3 years, while we were really working on trying to make that checkerboard, have as many towns as possible be doing something.
Mhm.
And again, everybody didn't have to do it. Everybody didn't have to have a ban. We just needed to create a lot of chaos in the eyes of the gas industry, because they literally want things crystallized, fossilized, ossified. Like, they want to know, here's what we can do, we've got it locked down. And we were constantly sort of shifting the game on them.
So Helen, I see this as really a David and Goliath fight, where you won against the oil industry. And were you I mean, I've asked you before if you were surprised, but for you, when you found out you were going to get the Goldman Prize, tell us about the Goldman Prize and what was the most interesting part after you won the Goldman Prize. And I'm just going to adjust my lighting while you're talking.
Sure. So the Goldman Environmental Prize is actually based out of San Francisco, and they award the prize to a grassroots environmentalist from one of each of the inhabited continents and island nations. And so to find out that I had been awarded this, incredibly prestigious award was just crazy. And I thought to myself, I don't deserve this. Like, there's so many other people, so many other things that are out there. This seems crazy. Go out to San Francisco, meet the other prize winners. Every single one of them, each of whom I could recognize as amazingly awesome. It's like, I didn't really do anything. So it was like, these really all are just everyday regular people who decided they were going to commit to doing something, that they weren't going to back down, that they were going to see a project through to conclusion, despite the naysayers. And so that was like the first most interesting thing. The second most interesting thing was that at the end of the day, we weren't fighting 6 different problems or, over the course of the prize, 180 different problems. We're fighting one problem. And the one problem is buying into and really seeing as the only option what is actually an ideology or a construct of control, domination, exploitation, and extraction. That does not have to be how the world works. We have decided, I was watching a show the other night, and it was like basically rule number 1, like, it is immoral for a sucker to be allowed to hold on to their money. Like, if we can take somebody's money, and we don't, that was a loss if you're a business person. And that's really sort of this idea of we need to control, we need to dominate, we need to just be truly destroying the very fabric that supports life. And that is a choice. That is not that does not have to be the default. And when one shifts to a more present time oriented collaboration, cultivation, how do we grow something? How do we nurture something? That shift would solve all of those problems that we have that are really, they're not problems. They're just the actual output of a system that's designed to kill things. Like, things die when the focus is on believing things are separate and fragmented and not connected in the first place. It informs the whole way you approach things. And with a shift to what we call sort of regenerative law, where you're focusing on how do you align with nature, how do you sail with the wind, how do you use that resistance, how do you make life richer rather than poorer. And that really, it's amazing when you listen to the stories of all of the prize winners, and there are some amazing prize winners. They're all about the power of the individual to really, not so much part of it's leading change, but it's really helping to create the space and the environment for these new solutions and for life itself to emerge. You can't, I saw a picture recently, it was a plant that had a little ladder next to it, and people you don't have to instruct an acorn on how to turn into an oak tree. It has an intelligent living design inside of it. And that's what that's how we achieve these victories, is when people tap into that power and to the actual unfolding of this. We're surrounded by energy. We don't need to in fact, we had to put a fair amount in order for life to be able to exist as we know it. We needed to bury away and take out all this carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, not have it present on the surface or in the atmosphere. And this idea of like, we're going to dig up the very things that we needed to have buried for life to exist. It's just kind of mind-blowing.
So do you feel that you influence the mindset of, you know, the people who you were speaking with at these town hall meetings throughout New York? Was that difficult?
It was amazing. I mentioned, we talked at the beginning of this about how I had gone to a number of meetings and was meeting with people, and I spent a summer in the Cornell Law Library just reading everything that I could that was possibly related to this. And pieces started to fit together, and I was at a meeting and I was like, you know, I think I have this idea. I haven't really figured it out yet, but I think we could use the local laws to ban what I'm thinking we could call high impact heavy industrial uses. We don't say we're banning fracking, we're banning high impact heavy industrial uses. We'll use land use laws. I didn't get the words out of my mouth before people were talking, oh, that's awesome. Like, we're going to start petitioning drives, and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. The energy that was released when people thought they had a chance, when they thought that there was a way forward, like we didn't have to, everyone that I know that we worked with in this oddly found, and we did too, it's how we managed to keep these crazy, it was oddly, tremendously energizing and empowering to be part of this fight. And for the people who were in it, it was just, it was really, I mean, it was very difficult, and lots of it that I would not want to replicate. But what people called preaching to the choir, when the activists would get together and have an educational event and just be it was really not, there was no problem recruiting people to the cause, getting people to consistently show up. And that's why we liked the local law idea, because it wasn't like you had to travel 3 or 4 hours to Albany. If you had to try to keep people, that's how the system's designed. If you had to keep people motivated and get them on buses to go 4 hours away to talk to legislators who weren't going to listen to them anyways, people can't sustain that. That's not regenerative. That doesn't give you back as much energy as you put into it. It just drains you. Mm-hmm. And local communities and working with your neighbors and petitioning and talking to your own town board and this local sense of place, it's like the land itself sort of sprung up and will like energize the people to protect it. It really was just a phenomenal experience for so many people.
I'm glad to hear that. That's nice to know that, you know, once you began the work, people fell in behind you to support it. I do want to just mention 2 more things because we're getting close to 8 o'clock, and I know you're in Massachusetts or New York, right? You're in Massachusetts right now, so you're 3 hours ahead of us. So right now it's almost 11 o'clock for you, and I thank you for being willing to do this.
It's like all day. So yeah, it's like
so I'm going to ask you one other question, and then I'm going to ask you one final question. What was it like having Bonnie Raitt and Graham Nash serenade you at the Goldman Award ceremony in San Francisco in 2014?
Well, that was just amazing. I went to law school I graduated in 92, and Bonnie Raitt was the soundtrack to my law school. My roommate actually had a number of her CDs. I wasn't familiar with her before that. And I just listened to her constantly. And so for her to be one of the, you know, and Graham Nash, like everything you grew up with,
right?
And the way the two of them got along and really knew each other. But when I was talking to Bonnie at the ceremony, oh, I'm so impressed. Like, it's so great to meet you. It's like, oh my God, like, it's so great for me to meet you. Like, you were just an amazing, support to me through law school, having your music available. So that was just, that never gets old.
That's true. And she is doing a tour again right now. I don't know if you know that. And actually, one of my friends from Worcester is her guitar player, and he's touring with her right now. So once again, 6 degrees of separation. My final question I want to just pose to you. You talk about all these ideas, innovation, collaboration, getting people excited on a local level, and that it's regenerative. So I wonder if you could tell me about the Regenerative Law Institute, which you are co-founder of.
So, yes, so thank you so much for that. So what we had this amazing victory against fracking. And what I've been spending the last year, basically all of the time since winning the prize and meeting these other prize winners and really feeling like there was one problem, not 100 problems, was what is like the meta lesson, the larger lesson, the next level of this. And that's what the Regenerative Law Institute is designed for. So this idea of transformational change, of evolution, that we really need to turn the page, and that the way to achieve change is to align with these natural principles, with living systems principles. And in looking at the fracking fight and trying to, we talked about some of these elements of coming up with the idea of using, not falling into the trap of let's just regulate, coming up with that idea. How did that happen? How did we go from how did we get those seeds of those first towns to turn into the many towns wanting this? How did we build community? And so we've turned that into this framework of meander, spiral, explode, as a way of, we had to meander around, we had to look at the situation with fracking coming from many different perspectives, not just the kind of default, there's nothing to see here, let's just talk about regulations, to find the lever to really unlock this possible future. And then, so that's what this Regenerative Law Institute is about, about really, how do we create the world we want? How do we create conditions for flourishing? And how do we get people excited about the prospect that we can still do so much to make the world more just, more equitable, more inclusive, and really cultivating the conditions for humanity to flourish. We have that capability. We do not have to be degenerative. We do not have to destroy the very fabric that supports life. And that's, for me, I'm excited. I'm so excited about this and the prospect of really taking this message and taking the story of New York. It was truly an impossible victory that I was convinced we were going to do it. No one else in the beginning thought that was, it was like, well, and every time we'd win a battle, people were like, oh my God, we won. I'm like, of course we won. I'd be like, we wanted to win, but we didn't really think we were going to win. You were so convinced about this. So really trying to open up people's imaginations and to see that we impose these limits on our thinking about what's possible. And from that perspective, it's not possible because you're not willing to do it. You're not looking to do it. You've decided it can't be done. You've thrown your hands up. You've said, screw it. Well, okay. Yeah, I agree. But if you don't take that position and you say, what can I do? How do I take even this wind that's pushing at me, and how do I surf that? How do I use that energy to move forward. And that's the goal.
And I'm going to read the description of the Regenerative Law Institute, of which you are a co-founder. RLI is a social action and advocacy organization that supports the co-creation of a just, equitable, and inclusive world where everybody has the opportunity to flourish. Helen helps her clients conceptualize transformational ways to approach the situations they face. Helen works with entrepreneurs, nonprofits, women-led businesses, and other enterprises that seek to change traditional or degenerative operating systems and the thinking that goes with it. As their trusted advisor and thinking partner, Helen helps clients align their goals with the underlying principles of living systems which naturally regenerate and transform. And Helen, I know that you have a new website. Would you like to give that website address? I will type it in the chat.
I will. It's regenerativelawcom. And there's a place where you can sign up. Oh, you beat me to it. You're a faster type.
I think this is just going to host, and David's going to have to convert
host
it so everyone else can see it,
Oh,
which
no,
I'm
there's
sure.
one to everyone. Regenerative.
There's a drop-down box and you send it to everyone instead of
I see.
Yeah. which Helen just did.
Oh, good. Very good. See, she's quicker on the draw than I am.
Yeah.
And that's at 11 o'clock at night. She's quicker on the draw. So that says something about her normal energy. So would you be willing to answer any questions if people have questions?
I would be delighted.
Okay.
David, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Hi. We don't have any questions in the Q&A yet. So if any of you have any questions and would like to type them in, I will forward them on. But I have one question because, you know, do you think this is a permanent Pat, don't type an answer, please.
Nope.
If you do, it makes it disappear.
Oh,
So I won't be able to
did.
get the question.
Okay. Well, no, there was a
Yeah.
question was, does Helen take on clients outside of New York?
Yeah.
And I'll let Helen answer
Yeah,
that.
but if you answer the question, it's not this, everybody else doesn't hear it. If you type
Okay.
an answer, so we'll ask the questions. So the, you know, have they given up? Or are they still trying nefarious ways to get the fracking in? Is this like a constant battle, or is this?
It has not been. The gas prices were very low when the statewide ban was put in place. And the thinking was that that's part of what allowed that to politically happen. So as things remain sort of very difficult, you know, with the situation in Ukraine and with the oil and gas markets, there could be more pressure on New York to change its stance. However, there is a statutory ban, like a law, so you would have to change the law. There's a regulatory ban, so you'd have to change the regulations, which requires in New York a whole environmental review process. And we were able to, it would be very difficult to get that regulatory ban undone. And then there are local bans. So it's like there's this patchwork of, it's not an easy, it would not be easy. You would have to undo the state ban, undo the regulatory ban, and then undo these local bans to proceed with, you know, in New York. So never say never. And they're the most powerful entrenched industry on the planet. You know, it's been said for decades now, you know, you can't get elected without the oil and gas industry, and you can't govern with the oil and gas industry. So like they truly, and in New York, they wrote the regulations, so you don't count them out, but it's pretty solid in New York.
Okay.
And on the question that was asked about, so I am as a lawyer, I only practice in New York, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire. The Regenerative Law Institute is not a law firm. That is a advocacy organization. So for clients who were looking for advice on how to run a campaign like this, how to achieve transformational change, how to could include looking at the legal structure and how you would act in that. To the extent that I'm not acting in a legal capacity, I work around the country, and that's part of what the Regenerative Law Institute is designed to do, to have a very clear demarcation between practicing law and basically social advocacy, changing the world activities, for which I have no bounds.
Yeah. We have a question. What do you think, would this be possible to do in, and they asked in, say, Montana or South Dakota? Would this be?
So it had been possible in any number of states. The oil and gas industry, as I mentioned, is very powerful, and they write the laws in many, many places. So the ability to do what we did in New York and other states has been taken away. Even Texas used to allow some form of local zoning about even in Texas for decades. After the New York fight, they basically the industry went around, having lost in New York, and shored up, and really across the country, taking away people's rights to local government, which was quite interesting to see. The very people who typically are all about local control, state control, not relying on the federal government, to all of a sudden say, in this one instance, we need it to be the federal government, not the state or the local government. So that has been, it is not, you cannot take the tactics, exactly what we did in New York, and apply that in other places. That's why we had to come up with this overall framework of how do you, for a different situation, these aren't cookie cutter solutions. What was the actual process that led to what we did in New York? And that's what the Regenerative Law Institute is about, is how do you achieve impossible results? How do you get out of the box of limited thinking and really create a future instead of arguing about or trying to fix the past?
That makes sense. We have a question about, we have, communities like Kern County in California. The tax base is basically centered on oil drilling. If that went away, so, when you've worked with communities like that, where it's all about the money for the community, have you been able to get the people to realize what, that if you drill that oil well next to a residential community, that this is dangerous for those people, that it's not a good idea?
So it's difficult. People this is why it's the underlying thinking and the imagination about what's possible has to be changed. Because in a world in which, well, if I can get some money, even if I'm exposing my own child to petroleum products, to benzene, to this, the answer, those people under those circumstances are going to think that taking the money today is the right thing to do. So on the same circumstance, like there are people, you see people get, they're going to shoot you, but they take you out to the desert and they tell you to dig your own grave. And rather than be shot right away, you figure, well, I'll dig my grave, because that'll get another 10 minutes. These are literally jobs, digging graves for humanity. And that's part of what this Regenerative Law Institute is about, because it really requires the mentality that would sacrifice humanity for money in the pocket today. It's that thinking that has to be addressed, because if you think that, you can't get out of the box if you think that. And that's trying to open people up. And that's what they'll say, you know, people have to spend, when people spend time in nature and when they spend time in the woods, their whole philosophy and understanding of how interconnected everything is. But we operate in a world of fragments and separation and think that we can somehow piece apart, you know, destroying the environment, harming people. And, you know, like, that's not really, it's just really about this one piece over here. Well, it's not just about that one piece. It can't be about just the one thing. And so trying to really connect all the dots to bring the web together and people to experience that, that's how you make the change. Because inside the problem, if you accept the premises of the people that say this is okay, I just need the money for X, Y, and Z reason, you can't get out of it. You can't get out of it.
And then we have one final question. Are there any specific issues your clients are working on that you can talk about that might be of interest?
So not especially. I mean, what I am working with a number of clients, all of my most favorite clients are really working on bringing forth justice, equity, and well-being into the world. And the good news is that there are it's hard for us to see the big picture. Our language doesn't help us do that. We aren't taught how to see that, but there are so many pieces out there that are coming together, that are really working towards this shift. And it's, you know, sort of concepts of tipping points and reaching critical mass. And there's a lot of that happening. And there's a lot of people really working on changing the fundamental assumptions and figuring out how to align with these natural principles to really truly create something that seems just impossible when you're stuck in a limited mindset that says there's a set menu of possibilities and it's A, B, and C. And if it hasn't been done before, and if there isn't an ROI, and if there isn't a template, and there isn't a 4-step plan, I'm not doing it. That just a shift away from recognizing the inherent limitations and how stuck that sort of thinking keeps you.
Well, Helen, you're a breath of fresh air, I must say, you know, and I speak for all of us here tonight. You have introduced us back to believing in the good in mankind. So thank you, mankind and womankind.
So yes, all of us here, and I'm just so appreciative, Pat and David, for all the work that you put into bringing this together and to create this, not only for the people who are here tonight, but to have this going forward and to really, I think it's an amazing story. We did the impossible in New York, and it's really not about like, how do you draft a local law? It's about thinking in a way that just opens up a world of possibilities. We are so much more powerful than we give ourselves credit for. And that was the lesson from the Goldman Prize. These were regular, I'm unusual. I'm a highly educated, very privileged attorney. Like I have the levers of power, like sort of in my hands. Many, many, many of the other recipients have none of those kind of resources and are able to achieve these just tremendous victories because they are embedded in the land and coming from this sense of place, coming from a sense of community. And they are really able to just do amazing things from that place. And we forget that we have tremendous power, especially when we come together.
I'm going to share the picture of you getting your award. Here you are. And you look like you're very happy about it in that photo. Thank you, Helen. And I want to thank everyone who attended tonight. This has been really eye-opening. And we will have this webinar recording link. David will take care of that, sending that out to everybody in a couple of days.
Yes. Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night, Helen.
Good night.
Job well done.
All right.